Hello, welcome to the 13th Man podcast. I am Abraham Abhishek. England's test team just wrapped up a historic tour to Pakistan. When the team landed in Pakistan, it was historic because it was the first time in 17 years that an English test team had come down there. By the time the team flew back, they had created some more history by getting their first series win in Pakistan in 21 years. And it was also the first time Pakistan had lost all matches in a home test series ever. It was not just the fact of Pakistan losing all three matches or the fact that it was their home series, it was also the manner in which England picked them apart. They were outplayed, steamrolled, Bazballed. Bazball. It's a term that's been around since the beginning of time, and many cricket fans, many English cricket fans, do believe that time began when Baz McCullum took over as England coach in July 2022. It's a good thing that at this historic tour there was Lawrence Booth, editor of Wisden Cricket Almanack, also known as the Bible of Cricket. It is a thick yellow encyclopedia that comes out annually that contains the records and reflections on everything that happened in cricket during the year. Lawrence is, of course, also a journalist who covers the game for a number of publications such as the Daily Mail in UK. What makes Lawrence cool, though, is that he agreed to talk to me and to share his experiences of Pakistan, how it was covering a test series organized under heavy security cover, and how it was watching Bazball unfold on an overseas tour. Most importantly, he tries to explain to me what is Bazball. So, Lawrence, was this your first time in Pakistan?
It was, yes. I've been to India many times, but obviously England hadn't been there for a test series since late 2005. I wasn't on that trip. I wasn't on the one 5 years earlier when Nasser Hussain's team won in the dark in Karachi. So, yeah, my first time, and I was really looking forward to it, and it met all the expectations, I would say.
And what were your first impressions? Do you have an immigration agent at the airport kind of a story, or a taxi driver right out the airport kind of a story, as a lot of journalists do?
God, I'm going to disappoint you here. It was actually pretty smooth sailing, really. We arrived into Islamabad. Actually, we had a story in Heathrow where our plane didn't take off for 4 hours, and then they had to replace it, and that plane almost didn't take off. Anyway, we got to Islamabad. It was absolutely fine, and we were whisked. It was all very well organised, actually. We'd been in touch with a local sort of ground agent in advance who's used to dealing with foreign journalists, and he'd organised all the internal travel and so on. So there was someone waiting for us at Islamabad airport, even though we arrived 4 hours late. They were waiting faithfully for us as we landed and whisked us off to the hotel. And then we were straight off to a press conference with Brendan McCullum at Rawalpindi. So it was sort of straight into action. Really, it was 2 days out 3 days out actually from the first test, and I was filing words within a couple of hours of landing. So that's the life of the modern journalist.
What was it like moving around? Was there a lot of security, and was it security that you guys had arranged for yourself, or had it been provided by the government or the PCB?
So essentially, what we were told beforehand was that it would be best to stay where possible in the same hotels as the teams. So in Islamabad, for example, there's a hotel called, obviously Islamabad, for those who don't know, is right next to Rawalpindi. So it's a kind of 25-minute drive from Islamabad, the capital, to Rawalpindi, which is like a sort of satellite town / city, really. So we were staying in Islamabad at the team hotel called the Serena, which was regarded as probably Pakistan's best business hotel. It was a very nice place. When we got to Multan, we couldn't stay in the team hotel. It wasn't big enough, so we were billeted somewhere else in the city. In fact, Multan was the place where the security was the tightest. Now there's sort of there's a military base either in the city or nearby, so the authorities are a bit more jumpy, shall we say, about foreign visitors. They say that any Western visitors are supposed to stay in only one of 5 hotels in the city, and we couldn't leave the hotel without an armed guard, a guy standing in front of us with a Kalashnikov and behind us with a Kalashnikov. Even if you're walking 100 yards up the street to the local restaurant, you had to get signed out by hotel reception. There'd be a man taking a photo of you as you left the hotel. They were kind of keeping tabs on you in Multan quite seriously. And because the test ended a day early there, we got to do a bit of sightseeing on what would have been the 5th morning of the game. and even just for walking around the place, we had these guys with guns sort of escorting us. So that was the one place where you felt sort of under lock and key a bit. And then when we got to Karachi for the third test, it was a bit more free again. And though we were not advised to go out and explore too much, there was certainly a bit more of that. I think people were a bit demob happy after the restrictions of Multan. So it was restricted, but it wasn't quite as well. We were led to in advance to believe that we should look out for ourselves and be careful, don't go out at night and so on. All that felt excessive once we were there. I mean, maybe that was because we did have security, I don't know, but it all felt perfectly safe to me. I never felt threatened once. In fact, I really enjoyed the whole vibe of the place.
And was that the general feeling amongst the English press, the English players, and the local press and the Pakistani players that you interacted with? Was the general feeling that the security cover is warranted, or was it that this is being done by the PCB more to reassure people, to demonstrate just how seriously they take this, just how tight the security is?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of what you just said at the end of your question there. Certainly, I mean, they clearly had to convince I suppose the Western cricket nations, if you like, that Pakistan is a safe place. So it helped when Australia toured earlier in the year without incident. Of course, the ECB and like other national boards have security advisors who visit the place in advance. There's a guy called Reg Dickerson who I think he's out there with the New Zealand team currently. So he runs a business where he sort of checks out the safety of places in advance, and he's certainly not going to let any team go anywhere that he deems to be unsafe. Look, I mean, the players, don't forget that the players had come out of a couple of years of lockdown situations, so they were used to staying in hotels, not being able to move at all. So in that sense, Pakistan felt a bit more liberal, even though they weren't supposed to leave their hotels other than to go to training or the ground. So they felt that, for example, the Serena Hotel in Islamabad was a sort of luxury prison, really. It was a big place, so there was lots to do. They had, lots of restaurants and so on. You could wander around. You just couldn't go out if you wanted to. I don't think that really hampered them that much. I think the main problem was a lot of them got ill before that first test, and that which of course you'll remember almost threatened the start of the test, where they're going to delay it for 24 hours and so on. And that illness never quite left the camp. I mean, the players were ill on and off throughout the test series, which kind of made their achievements all the more impressive, I felt, because Ollie Robinson might bowl a 3-over spell in Karachi and then run off to be sick and then come back on. And those were things you didn't actually hear about much. But when you talk to the guys, off the record, it was clear that illness was a big thing for them, and that ground some of them down a bit. I mean, that some of the journalists got ill as well. I was lucky. I was one of the few lucky ones who didn't come down with something. So that can deflate spirits a bit when you're away from home in a city that you're not allowed to leave without an armed guard, and then you're ill a lot. You have to kind of take a certain attitude to it and say, well, I'm here for the experience, I'm going to get through it. And despite these things, it's also fascinating, and the cricket's also great. So let's throw ourselves into it. So it was only 3.5 weeks as well. It wasn't like one of the old tours where it was sort of 2 months. The players got through it, and because they were winning, that helped too, I think.
That bug, did it have an effect beyond the first test as well? Did some of the players have it until later on in the series as well?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, throughout the series, and they didn't. They decided not to make a public thing of it, because the last thing, when England teams go to Asia, the old joke is, Delhi belly and that kind of thing, and it makes them look like whinging Westerners, or there's the colonial thing comes into it. Oh, the Westerners can't cope with the food, blah de blah. So they did keep it quiet. But yes, as I mentioned, like Robinson at Karachi was a good example of a guy who was struggling to stay on the field because of the illness. In fact, it was quite funny that the very last question of the tour was to Ben Stokes from a Pakistani journalist, and he said, there's this sort of culinary rivalry between Karachi and Lahore. So one of the local journalists said, how was the food in Karachi compared to Lahore? And Stokes had to remind them that England had brought their own chef on tour, which is the first time they'd done that. And Joe Root had to say quite early on in the tour that, look, we've not brought our own chef because we don't like Pakistani food or because we think we're going to get ill. It's just that most professional sporting teams now bring someone who can cater for the specific needs of the players, the dietary requirements. Mark Wood, for example, only eats pizza. You know, I mean, make of that what you will. But someone like him is not going to cope well in a country where you wouldn't get pizza necessarily in every restaurant. You would in some places. But so that came into play, and it looked, you know, I held my breath slightly thinking, oh, is this going to go down as one of those sort of cultural faux pas? You know, England bring their own chef because they can't stomach the Pakistani food. But I think the local journalist just about, you know, accepted that in the end. So yeah, you know, there are all these things that when England go abroad, there's always some little drama like that.
You just gave me the headline. Mark Wood eats only pizza.
You better double check that. I think it's pizza.
So what did you do after the day's play? After you were done with your copy, did you go out much? What are some of the top things to do in Rawalpindi, in Multan, in Karachi?
Well, you know, that one of the sort of the unfortunate secrets of touring life is that you don't always get a huge amount of time in the evening. So we'd have to file for a web match report on stumps essentially from the ground, and then we'd go to the press conference, and then we'd have to rewrite our match report for the newspaper. Then we'd write up a quotes piece, based on the press conference. I was ghosting Nasser Hussein's column for the Daily Mail. Then there'd be sort of some statistical pieces. Then you'd have to get back to the hotel, where I'd often then write my match report. So by the time I was finished with all my work, it would often be 8:30 in the evenings, and then, frankly, you're tired. And the easiest thing to do, especially in a place where you have to arrange a trip out, is to eat in your hotel. So in Islamabad and Multan, we were kind of hotel bound. There was one night in Islamabad where the PCB hosted the English press and a few of the Pakistani journalists, and took us up to this amazing sort of hillside or mountainside, really, restaurant overlooking the city. And it was spectacular. I mean, you had to go up these windy mountain paths, you know, and you're getting further and further away from the city. The lights were getting dimmer and dimmer from the streets of Islamabad, and you finally up in they're essentially the foothills of the Himalayas. You got these sensational views into the city. So that was our one big night in Islamabad, and it was a memorable one. Multan, there was one night where we got out to another restaurant, but we couldn't go much further than 100 yards down the street because of the security arrangements. Karachi was the sort of party city, relatively speaking, where we could get out. We had a very pleasant afternoon/evening at the Karachi Press Club, where the local journalists hosted the British journalists and showed us around and hosted us for dinner. A friend of a friend had a spectacular party at her place one night. Saw the Karachi sort of glitterati, I suppose, turned out to welcome us there. And yeah, we went out a couple of nights, so we could get out there in Karachi. We went to a restaurant on the sea, on the Arabian Sea, called Karachi Do Daria, which was spectacular. It was open to the elements, and a beautiful wooden construction, hundreds of people there. So that Karachi was a place really where I got a better flavour of the country. You know, Multan was kind of dusty and smoggy, I have to say. I mean, there were concerns about smog delaying the start of the test match. Even they didn't materialise, but in fact the New Zealanders moved their first test from Multan to Karachi, or the PCB did, because they were worried about smog. So Multan wasn't a kind of, you know, you weren't going out to sample the nightlife in Multan. Islamabad, probably, if we'd had a bit more time, we'd have seen a bit more of the place. And Karachi was a place where we got to let our hair down a bit. There was a French restaurant we went to one night, Café Flo, which sort of tolerated some of the, I have to be careful what I say here, but some of the habits of Westerners in Pakistan, sort of drinks-wise, I suppose. That's probably the safest way of putting it. Of course, that in itself was a bit of a challenge. But so, look, you've got a sense of the place. You never get as much of a sense of a place when you're on a cricket tour as you'd like to, because you are working, and the workload is greater now than it was 20 years ago, I would say, because of the internet specifically. And they might have sent 2 people per paper 20 years ago, but newspaper budgets have shrunk, so it's 1 person per paper now. So they're carrying a bigger workload. So, you know, you leave a country like that, a tour like that, and you think, I will go back and I'll do it properly as a tourist. England are going back in 2 years to Pakistan, when I hope we think Lahore will replace Multan on the schedule, because Lahore couldn't host a test this year because of smog. But if England go back in October rather than December in 2024, then Lahore should come into play. And that Lahore's a place I'd love to see. So and then I'll probably complain about the workload then as well, and say I'll have to come back in 2 years' time. But anyway, it's a great place, and I would recommend it.
Do you see things soon getting normal in Pakistan? Do you reckon the next time you go down, you'll be able to walk around without armed guards? With these recent tours, Pakistan seems to have taken initial but certain steps towards a situation where a tour to Pakistan is like a tour to anywhere else. Do you see that happening the next time you're there in 2024?
It's possible. I mean, Ramiz Raja, who was obviously recently ousted as the chairman of the PCB, he hasn't been making this point that the first visit of a country, of a Western nation, usually, because they're the ones who are most jittery about going to the East, has to be full of security. You have to convince them that they will emerge in one piece and it's fine. And then the second visit hopefully has less security. And the first visit shows them that actually, they don't have to fear for their lives every time they leave the front door of the hotel. So that is clearly the aim. I mean, if England are back in 2024 and Multan won't be on the agenda, which will help because of the sort of the inbuilt concerns there around the military infrastructure, then it should be more free and it should be even more fun. So yeah, absolutely, that is the aim.
Did you feel the emphasis on the historical nature of the tour and on the security aspect, taking the focus away from the cricket itself at any point?
I think at the start, I mean, there was a big thing about it's England's first Test series for 17 years. I mean, obviously they'd been for a T20 series a couple of months earlier, based in Lahore and Karachi, 7 matches. But this felt like the proper return of the England Test team, and that was certainly a big thing. 17 years away, how will they cope? What will the security be like? Actually, the security thing didn't then become an issue story-wise, because people got used to it pretty quickly. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, because of lockdown, people were used to living under certain restrictions, and they understood that this was for their safety in theory. So they weren't really going to complain that much about it. The historical nature kind of gave way to the 17 years thing, gave way to the 3-0 thing. By the end, it was can England become the first team to win 3-0 in Pakistan? So that the sort of historical thing switched slightly as the cricket developed. And that was fascinating in its own right. First of all, to win a second test, England had never won 2 tests in a series in Pakistan. They'd only won 2 tests ever in Pakistan, both on separate tours. So to win 2 tests in a series was already historic. Then it became, can they do it 3-0? And so that was interesting. It was like, how will both teams cope with this kind of dynamic? Will they play differently? Obviously, England were just going to keep doing what they were doing. Pakistan were spooked, I felt, by what was going on and didn't quite know how to react. So yeah, that side of it, I think, took over more by the end.
So the thing that Pakistan got spooked by was Bazball, of course. And I have a very stupid question regarding that, which is, what is it, apart from trying to score your runs as quickly as you can?
Well, first of all, I don't think that the point of it is not to score runs as quickly as you can. That is a byproduct of an attitude. And the attitude is essentially, and the players talked about this a lot, the removal of the fear of getting out, the removal of consequence for making a mistake. Now, that's what McCullum and Stokes have kind of bred into this team, is that it's about having fun. It's about expressing yourself. Cricketers have got out for hundreds of years. That is a fact of the game. Remove that fear, the fear of that, and let's see what happens. Now, obviously, what happens is that players are more inclined to play shots. I mean, actually, there wasn't a lot of slogging. I don't know how closely you watched the series, but the first day of Rawalpindi, England scored 506 for 4, and the only real risk-taking came right at the end of the day when Stokes came in and hit 30 or 15 balls or so, and he was really backing away and slicing over the slips. But the 4 guys who made hundreds, Crawley, Duckett, Pope and Brooke, were not slogging. It was just clean hitting. It was good. It was essentially, they looked to hit the bad balls for 4 and take a single off the good balls. In the old days, you'd defend the good balls and look to score off, maybe get a single or 2 off the bad ball. England were basically, their attitude was put pressure on the bowlers from the start. Now, Crawley took 14 off the first over of that test from Naseem Shah, Muhammad Ali? I can't quite remember who. But anyway, that kind of set the tone. And they were 170 by lunch. I mean, ridiculous stuff. And from that moment, really, Pakistan didn't quite know how to react. Could they just play their normal game? And England were just playing what they regarded as a normal brand of cricket. You know, there is a misnomer going around that they go out and they throw the bat. Now, anyone who's watched England closely will know that is not the case. All they do is take the aggressive or attacking, or no, the aggressive, the positive. Let's put it that way: the positive option, because they're not worried about getting out. And that is a huge shift in Test cricket. You know, that is almost a T20 approach, where, you know, the value of the wicket in T20 is less than in Test match cricket for obvious reasons, and that's why there is less jeopardy involved. Now, they've almost applied the lack of jeopardy from T20 cricket to Test cricket, with the effects we've seen, and it feels like a revolution, the likes of which we've barely seen in any form of international cricket since Test cricket was first played in 1877. I can't remember a sort of a tearing up of the rule book of an attitude to the degree that England have done. I know it winds some people up. They sort of, especially because it's England, and most people who are not England fans do not like England. I mean, that is you see it on Twitter for historical reasons, for other cultural reasons, no doubt. They are wound up by Bazball, and they are waiting for it to fail. They are absolutely waiting for it to fail. And when it does fail, they say, "Oh, see, I told you." Look, England have won 9 tests out of 10 in spectacular fashion, having won 1 out of 17. I mean, the proof of the pudding is there in the stats. It's sensational, and they've got people talking about Test cricket again. That's for me is the most exciting thing. They've got opponents thinking about it. Australia have been talking about Ron Ball, you know, because their coach is Andrew McDonald. His nickname's Ron. We'll play Ron Ball. It's like, sorry guys, that doesn't work. It's got other people thinking about Test cricket at a time when Test cricket desperately needs a shot in the arm. So I'm all for it, and I don't buy the argument that it's slogging. It simply isn't.
Well, it is a huge shift in the mindset, as you mentioned. It does not sound like some secret sauce that England has concocted. It sounds like a shift in attitude. It does not sound like a cheat code that they have figured out or something. Is it contingent though on certain conditions? Do the pitches have to be a certain amount of flat? Do the bowlers have to be below a certain level of quality? Or is it something that can be applied that teams, or certainly England, can look to apply in all manners of conditions against all kinds of attacks?
Well, put it this way: before they got to Pakistan, people said, "Oh, it won't work in the slow, low pitches of Pakistan. How are they going to do it again?" You know, and the first thing they do is score 500 in a day. Now in England, look, the ball seams and swings around in England more than any other country in the world. You've got the Duke's ball, which stays shiny, and the proud seam for 80 overs. So you might argue that it shouldn't work there. In England, in the English summer, so it started out against New Zealand, high quality seam attack, one of the best in the world. People said it won't work against them. India turned up. I remember Mohammed Siraj during Edgbaston Test saying, "Yeah, you see, New Zealand, they're all too slow, the bowlers. It won't work against our guys." And England scored 378 for 3, could have scored 500 to win that game. Then comes South Africa. Dean Elgar says, "I'd like to see them try it against our bowlers." And when England lose the first test at Lords, the response of Stokes and McCullum was very interesting. They said the problem was that England didn't go hard enough. You know, they forgot their basic rule. You know, most people would have gone, "Oh, well, maybe they're going to take a step back now." And then they win the next 2 tests. So, and then they come to Pakistan and they win 3-0. So at every turn so far, they've sort of gone against expectation. Now, obviously, it's not, as you say, it's not a cheat code. England haven't suddenly come up with a way of playing that is guaranteed victory. No team ever did that. I mean, okay, West Indies had a good run for 15 years with 4 good fast bowlers. Australia had Warne, McGrath, Gilchrist, and the rest of it. They had very good players. England have come up with a system. They have some good players, but the man for man, though, England's teams don't compare with the West Indies or Australia. They just have a change of mindset. Will it work in other countries? Well, they'll give it a go. Look, I mean, will it work in India on turning pitches? Who knows? But they're going to sure as hell find out. I mean, to take an example, in Multan, first morning, Abra Ahmed bowls. Looks like he's going to take all 10. By lunch, he's got 5 wickets, but England are 180 for 5. Now, in the old days, they'd have been 80 for 5, and they'd probably lost that game. But because they were counter-attacking while Ahmed was taking his wickets, it didn't matter. They got so far ahead of the game, and I think that's what will happen when they go to India in just over a year's time, isn't it? They play 5 tests in early 2024 in India. It'll be fascinating to see how they go against Ashwin if he's still around then. I think he is. They will attack him, and it will put noses out of joint. And people say people will say they're slogging. People will have a go at them. They will wait for it to fail. Will it succeed against Australia in the English summer? Why not? I mean, Australia haven't won in England since 2001, and that's with England playing conventional cricket. So why should Australia suddenly succeed against an ultra aggressive England team? We'll see. It's going to fall flat on its backside at some, of course, but so do other teams playing conventional cricket. They've just given themselves a better chance, and they're enjoying themselves, and it's more entertaining to watch. So there are lots of ticks, and so far we haven't seen too many of the downsides.
Yeah, no, it is certainly something that people look forward to more, England supporters or otherwise. To me, Pakistan's first test against New Zealand in Karachi, day 5 was yesterday, by the way, to those listening. To me, that test is a Bazball counterfactual. A taste of test match cricket in Pakistan saw Bazball, if you like. So Pakistan batted first and scored 1,000 runs. New Zealand followed up with 1,500. And by the time they were done, 4 days were up. And that facade of a declaration by Babar was a bit of a joke, in my opinion. With England's approach, we would have had a result, no? One way or another.
Well, I think so. And I saw a lot of strange things said on Twitter that, if Stokes had declared like Babar, then everyone would have said, what a great declaration. And I said, no, I'm afraid that is not the case. First of all, Stokes would not have allowed the game to reach that position where they're only... If he was thinking about winning that game, he would have got England to score more quickly on the final day. He wouldn't have given New Zealand a sniff of 138 in 15 overs when his own team had no chance of winning. I mean, that's lunacy. What was Babar thinking? I mean, my only conclusion there was that Bazball had got into his head somehow and he thought he was being funky or interesting. It was a ridiculous decision. It could have cost Pakistan, who'd fought so hard to save that game. But they played, both teams, as you say, had played conventional cricket for 4 3/4 days. You don't then throw a Bazball moment into the equation and hope that you'll be regarded as funky. It was a terrible decision, really, by Babar. And you're right that the whole test was an indication of what Test cricket can be, unfortunately, if neither side is proactive enough. And it was very strange, coming straight after England's game in Karachi, which was over in three and a bit days. Actually, I suppose the pitch was that it was the same sort of flatness. It was just that England attacked more and had more penetrative bowlers than New Zealand did. So yeah, it was a fascinating insight into how will other teams react to Bazball. Pakistan didn't really react until the last minute when it was stupid to react, and New Zealand just did their own thing. New Zealand are England's next opponents in February. 2 tests in New Zealand. That'll be fascinating on flat pitches there. Although the first test is under lights, Mount Maunganui, ball might swing around. Again, England's Test series now. You look forward to them in a way you didn't before. I mean, under Root and Silverwood, they played very dull Test cricket for a couple of years. They were poor to watch, and they were deluded. They kept saying they were going to turn the corner. It was obvious to most of us they weren't. Now you're excited, and now England are the talk of the town in Test cricket, which they haven't been for a long, long time. And I hope. I mean, Stokes keeps saying he's not preaching to other countries. He's not telling them how they have to play. That's good, because I know that would wind up a lot of people if he did that. But it'll be interesting to see if that kind of gets absorbed by other nations. Will there be moments where they take a Bazball option in a sensible way, not in the way that Babar Azam did it at the end of the Karachi test against New Zealand?
Do you think Bazball can be replicated by other teams, or should it be? Or do you think teams are better off finding their own strong suits? Is it suits or sweets? Suits. Do you think teams are better off trying to find their own strong suits and sticking to them?
No, that's a good point. You have to play to your strengths, clearly. And one of England's, England have had this white ball emphasis for a while now. When Owen Morgan came in 2015, and a generation of younger batters in England have grown up playing with a view to scoring quickly. And the guys like, for example, Ben Duckett and Harry Brook, who came into this Test series, I mean, they came in on the back of a very good T20 series in Pakistan in September. They were England's 2 leading scorers, and they batted in a sort of white ball style in a way. I mean, Duckett swept and reverse swept everything. Brooks scored at a strike rate of 93 in the Test series while scoring 300s. I mean, that is phenomenal stuff, really. And so England do have this cohort of young, talented, aggressive batters who've honed their game in white ball county cricket, but also have a red ball defensive technique. So it's not just that they are purely white ball, it's just that the sort of change of mindset, the change of shift towards white ball cricket has helped them come in. Now, not every country has that. Not every country has that group of young white ball players. I mean, someone like Surya Kumar Yadav for India, for example, be fascinating to see how he might go in Test level, because he is one of the most talented white ball players on the planet. Australia, Smith and Labuschagne aren't going to start playing Bazball because it's just not their style. You know, they will grind out the runs in their, not that they're conventional, but in their own unorthodox ways. So not every country can do it. England have got the captain and the coach to apply it. They've got the batsman to go after it, and that's essentially, those are the ingredients you need. But also they've applied it their bowling a bit as well. You know, bowling bounces with the new ball in the second innings at Rawalpindi, for example, because they decided that conventional new ball bowling was getting murdered by the opening batters. So let's try something different. And Pakistan was suddenly 25 for 2 with Azhar Ali retired hurt. So they're doing different things all the time with the ball as well as the bat. You know, don't be sort of fooled into thinking it's just a batting thing. So yes, clearly every team has to do what works for them. I just wonder whether one or two will get sucked out of their comfort zone by what England are doing, or one or two will start picking different types of batters because they think, yeah, actually we need to hurry the game along to give ourselves a better chance of winning. Stokes has got this thing about saving Test cricket. I think a bit of that is a sort of confidence trick on his own players. He wants to give them all sorts of reasons to play the way they're playing and to justify it, and that's one of them. It may well be that a happy byproduct of the way England play is that more people are interested in Test cricket. I don't necessarily think that's his first motive. I think he wants to win games of cricket while having fun, essentially. And if people think Test cricket's more fun as a result, then great. So look, we're in for an interesting couple of years, because Stokes won't be around forever either. You know, be Test captain for 3 or 4 years. McCullum has a 4-year contract, started last year. What happens after that? This may be a glorious blip in the history of Test cricket, or it may be something that changes the way the game's played. I think it's too early to say at the moment.
So what do you think has gone into Bazball? Like, England switched to it rather than transition to it, right? There was the drubbing in Australia, series lost to the West Indies, then change in coach, change in captain, change in admin, and bam, Bazball. New Zealand whitewashed, India beaten, hiccup against South Africa, and then back at it against Pakistan. It has been quick, and it has happened with kind of the same core of players and over a very short period of time. So what do you reckon was the process that went into it? It seems more microwave than slow roasting a turkey in the oven, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good analogy. Essentially, when England lost to Australia and then went to the West Indies and didn't pick Broad and Anderson and lost 1-0 there, and Root finally resigned, things were at a very low ebb. Now, there was no one in any position of authority. There was no director of cricket. The coach, we had an interim coach in the West Indies in Paul Collingwood. Root had gone. There was an outgoing chief executive. There was an interim chairman of the ECB. You know, there was a vacuum at the head of English cricket. Now, what they did was they appointed very well. They got Rob Key in as director of cricket, who has a modern approach to the game and knows the game inside out. A recent player, he's commentated on it for Sky. He decided Stokes was the man. McCullum came in because now everyone thought McCullum was going to be England's new white ball coach. Key's great moment of genius was to say, no, I think this guy could revolutionise the red ball game. So as soon as he got those two in place, and they're two of the most attack-minded recent cricketers of the last 20 years, Stokes and McCullum, and they're the two guys who've hit most Test sixes in Test history, the joint on 107 at the moment. Stokes kept trying to break his record in Pakistan, and there was sort of ongoing jokes about it. So they got those two guys in place, and they didn't actually change the personnel much. I mean, Broad and Anderson came back, obviously, because you don't have to be Einstein to work out that it was dumb leaving them out from the West Indies while they're still fit, still, you know, bowl them. And there wasn't much change. I mean, Alex Lees, he's been the only guy who's been dropped since Bazball happened. At the end of the English summer, he didn't go to Pakistan. He was the opener with Crawley. They brought in Ben Duckett. Brooke came in at the end of the series when Johnny Bairstow broke his leg playing golf. So that was a kind of fortuitous moment for Brooke, if not for Bairstow. They stuck with Ben Folkes behind the stumps, who's not a very Bazball batsman. He's a sort of orthodox player, scores at 50 per 100 balls. So really, it was a change of mindset, not personnel, and that's the fascinating thing about it. They appointed well, and then they basically had a word with them in the dressing room. They said, "Look, it wasn't working how we were playing. We won one test out of 17. We'd become the laughing stock of Test cricket. A team with all these resources and history was playing dismal Test cricket, and Root kept telling us that it was going to get better, and it never did, because Root and Silverwood were essentially two conservatively minded players. Root, a world-class batter, but as a captain, he was underwhelming, I would say, and Silverwood was not an innovative kind of thinker. So they weren't sparking off each other at all. Now, what Stokes and McCullum do is they try and outdo each other in terms of the sort of outrageous thought processes. Like Rehan Ahmed coming in at number 3 in Karachi as they tried to score the runs that night. Stuart Broad, Chris, and the Nighthawk instead of the Night Watchman, going up to number 8. He'd been a number 10 or 11 really under Root, and his batting had fallen away. And McCullum was like, "I've seen you hit sixes. Go, you're our number 8." And he had a couple of quite good innings as a result of that. So kind of filling these guys with confidence. Jack Leach opening the bowling, takes 10 wickets at Headingley against New Zealand, 5 and 5. Robinson comes back fitter. He wants to be part of it and is now a world-class seamer. He's got the lowest England bowling average since Frank Tyson in the 1950s of guys who've taken 50 wickets. Jimmy Anderson bowling like a dream at the age of 40. All these things, these guys are all enthused by the excellent man management of Stokes and McCullum. I mean, that, if anything, is the message. I think is the thing that other teams should look at, is the man management, is how are players being treated. It's not necessarily how they play, it's how they're being encouraged to play. I think that is the great kind of genius of what Stokes and McCullum have done. They know how to get the best out of guys. And as it was funny, actually, a lot of the players say, they talk about Stokes as captain, and we'll say, "Oh, what do you?" When Stokes asks you to do something, what do you say? And they say, "Well, it's Ben Stokes. You don't say no." And he has this natural presence, in a way that Root didn't. I think Stokes has this charisma, this authority. He's a bit scary. He's a bit intimidating, Ben Stokes. You don't want to ask him a silly question at a press conference because he'll give you a silly answer. And the players follow him 100%. There are no questions asked. So, he's like the guy leading the troops over the top in the trenches. They just run after him. And that is an indefinable quality, I guess, as a captain. You've either got that or you haven't. And England are lucky right now that their captain has it in spades.
Lawrence, before we close, a word on Pakistan. They just don't seem to be able to win at home, do they? In white ball cricket, they seem to have fast bowlers on tap, but they just seem to vanish as soon as it's time to put on the white kit. And the pitches, what's with those pitches? What are those pitches? So I guess if I have to phrase this into a question, it would be, what's ailing Pakistan's Test cricket?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we get to the first test in Rawalpindi and Shaheen Shah Afridi is missing, injured. So straight away, their strike bowler's gone. And that will take 30-40% off the value of their attack. Then Naseem Shah and Haris Rauf both get injured in the first test. And they're playing this guy, Muhammad Ali, who, God bless him, it was 80 miles an hour in his first over and looked like a county trundler. And was picked for the second test. Again, shouldn't have been. Then in the first test, they don't pick Abra Ahmed. They pick Zahid Mahmood, the leg spinner, who goes for 350 runs in the game. And I know he ended up with 12 wickets, but they're all because England were trying to whack him out of the ground. So they're picking the wrong teams. There's a hierarchy. There's a conservative approach in Pakistan cricket where Saqlain Mushtaq was asked about the Abra Zahid situation. He said, well, Zahid Mahmood was ahead of him in the pecking order. Now, England wouldn't do that. They'd say, well, hang on, Rehan Ahmed is ready for Test cricket and he's going to bring something to the game. And they pick him and he takes 5 in his first Test match, 7 wickets in the game. So I think they back their cricketers better. Pakistan are still, it's still a kind of hierarchical, it's a hierarchical society, and that feeds into the hierarchical cricket dressing room, where they're afraid to make bold decisions because it will upset some senior players, will put noses out of joint, and that is holding Pakistan cricket back. The pitches, Ramiz Raja was being very rude about the Rawalpindi pitch during the game. He was speaking openly about the fact that we haven't been able to produce match-winning pitches. And Pakistan's always had that problem. The pitches have always been slow and low and flat. It's why you've had historically so many draws in Pakistan. Now, England's sort of masterstroke really was to say that we're going to ignore the flatness of the pitch. We're going to enjoy the flatness. That's what Stokes kept saying. Enjoy the flatness and see if we get a result out of it. And then he declares at tea on the fourth day at Rawalpindi, and everyone said he'd gone mad. But actually, it was a beautifully timed declaration, because it gave Pakistan the illusion that they were still in the game and they kept chasing the runs rather than blocking for the draw. So there are ways round it, but Pakistan weren't going to be the team who were driving those ways round it. You know, they'd have happily taken, by the looks of things, they'd have happily taken 3 draws. Although the Multan turned a bit more and Karachi turned a bit more, and they did get their best team of those available on the park. Abrar Ahmed looked a threat. Babar Azam is not a good captain, I'm afraid to say. Forget the silly declaration against New Zealand, but against England, he went on the defensive so quickly. At Karachi, there was a time when Brooke and Folkes were batting in England's first innings, and England was something like 150 for 5, chasing 281, in reply to Pakistan's 281. Pakistan needed one more wicket, and they're in the lower order, and Babar spread the field. And Brooke and Folkes just picked them off and gave England a lead, and then the rest, you know. So there is a kind of conservatism, I would say, within Pakistani cricket, and they've probably gone back to it now by getting rid of Ramiz Raja, who was at least sort of trying to do things differently. He'd imported soil from Australian pitches, for example, to try to make the Pakistani pitches a bit bouncier. I mean, it's probably doomed to failure as a sort of geological project, if you like, but at least he was trying something different. Now they've gone back to a bit more old school administration, and that is not good for them. There'll be the infighting. You see it from all the Twitter comments, Pakistani journalists, the stories they're writing now. It's not in a good place, and I feel for them because it's such a vibrant cricket culture, isn't it? You know, the fast bowlers and spinners, and some really good batsmen. I mean, Imam ul Haq and Abdullah Shafiq are a good opening pair. Babar's a world-class player. Mohammad Rizwan, I think, has been a bit unlucky. I know Sarfraz came in and played well against New Zealand. Saud Shakil is a good player, played very well against England, and Salman got 100 against New Zealand. There's a core of a team there. If only they can get it right off the field, but we will see. It's difficult times for them.
Yeah, I certainly hope this year has better days for Pakistan in red ball cricket, because last year was pretty abysmal, to say the least. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks a lot for making the time on the last day of the year. As I mentioned earlier, I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on, Abraham. Take care. Happy New Year.
Thanks, you too. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.